Governing documents, always a fun topic,
Yeah.
right? Today I wanted to talk about amending governing documents. So just as a nutshell recap, usually the articles and the declarations, legal documents, usually it's 2/3 or 75 or 67% to approve. Bylaws, usually a little less, usually majority of people at a meeting is typically the requirements. So they're not easy to change, right? They're not easy to amend. One of the things that my contention, and then I'd love to hear your view, is that if you're considering an amendment to something, usually it's the declarations, right? Usually you want to amend something like leasing restrictions or pet restrictions or special assessment requirements. Usually it's things like that you're wanting to amend. I've always had the contention that I'll tell boards, if you're considering an amendment, consider just restating the document. Especially if it's an older document. If it's a newer association with new documents and there's a specific thing you want to change, maybe it doesn't make sense. But for an overwhelming majority of the time, I would tell a board, if there's one change you want to make, I know there's others. So let's just review the entire document together and make all the changes that you want to make, because the requirement is the same. You can have 76% of people vote in favor of a new document with all sorts of changes, or you can have 76% of people vote for one change and then 6 months later another change. So that's been my contention, is just restate the document. Do you have any thoughts on that, or do you have any experience with it?
Yeah, I think it's situational, because restating comes with hurdles, and recently we've had statute changes that make it much easier to restate documents because you don't have to have the mortgage company buy in like you used to. But it really depends. So if it's something that is a 1-point change, and I know most of the members are behind it, I might go with that route as opposed to completely restating, because it's harder to get all of your members there without objections.
Got it.
And then it's overwhelming too, I think, for a board to have to review an entire new declaration. Although restating and risk management would be probably the preferred way to go, because then you know you're in compliance with McIWA. Right? And the expense with restating is no different than an amendment.
Maybe it costs you $2,000 for an amendment. Maybe it's $5,000 for a new document.
Well, and maybe not even $5,000, because oftentimes you're working with attorneys who have those basic templates in place already that align with McIWA. So economically, it makes sense to consider both before doing anything.
But another advantage to restating, rather than, you bring up some interesting points about the restating as a more comprehensive, event to take on, because people really have to wrap their heads around a 30-page document instead of one paragraph. So I get your point. But one advantage that does come with restating, though, is you also are freshening the language to bring the language up to. You and I have been around a long time. Some of the language from the documents in the 70s and the 80s. Good luck, right? They were pretty much written by an attorney for only an attorney to understand.
Well, and the thing that provides value for both a member and the board when you're restating is that restating serves the interest of both. Minnesota McIWA has changed to protect both the buyer, the homeowner, and the association. So you get that value of both worlds when you restate your documents, as opposed to making onesie-twosie revisions.
So I got to tell you a story. This is how I came to this conclusion. One of my first associations I started managing was a townhome community built in the 70s. And they had their original declaration, but they had it amended 26 times. And it got so confusing that there was amendments to amendments. And you'd read through the 30-page declaration, but actually it was 122 pages with all of the amendments. And we actually, what precipitated us to really look at our documents, this particular association was enforcing the First Amendment to something, but unbeknownst to them, there was a Second Amendment that was filed, but no one ever had a copy of it. So what we had to do was we hired an attorney that we both know but shall remain nameless. We hired an attorney to write a compilation. So essentially they just rewrote the declaration so that we knew what all of the most current amendments were, and that was still 90 pages long.
Yeah.
And I had 3 attorneys at that time say that this is the worst set of documents I've ever seen, and you could tell that wasn't a line. So that was what prompted us. We got that compilation, is what they called it, of amendments, and then that prompted us to say, why don't we just get a whole new declaration and start over?
Right.
That was, anyway, it's a side story of one of my experiences with it, but it taught me early on, like if you have multiple amendments, if you have multiple changes you want to make, if you have one change, you probably want to make others, so maybe consider restating, because like we said, if it takes 76%, why not do it one time for a whole set rather than one time per thing down the road?
Right. Yeah. I've actually had something really similar happen where there were numerous amendments, and it was very difficult to track those.
When they have Amendment 1A, you're in trouble, right?
Right. And when you're in the business, you start to kind of know how the amendments work, because oftentimes they're adding in additional units or lots and blocks, and they're not always material.
Right.
But sometimes they are. So you could have a community that has 50 amendments and 45 of them are meaningless and just additional lots and blocks.
Yep.
And with that one, though, that might have that little
thing you missed.
That you missed. Or I've had cases where we've had amendments, and when you have to add the real estate into the mix, certain areas got missed.
Sure.
Well, that's a problem, because now the amendment doesn't apply to
Sure.
those parcels. So, the more you amend a declaration, the greater your chances are at making a mistake. And it's very risky. So sometimes, full restatement is the way to go.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing your time and your experience with amending versus restating, and it's a case-by-case basis for sure.
Yeah.
But hopefully associations consider restating if that's what they need to do.